Those bills are set down for first reading. The House comes to questions for oral answer. Question number 1, in the name of Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance and asks, does he consider that the government's Meridian energy sale was a failure, given that it attracted only 62,000 retail buyers, which is only a quarter of the 250,000 forecast?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, no, I don't agree with that. The Meridian float is in fact by value the largest retail investment in an IPO in New Zealand's history. The 62,000 shareholders means Meridian will have the third largest share register of all the companies on the NZX when it lists next week. The share float will provide $1.9 billion in cash for the government, which we can invest in other public assets without having to borrow. It will be 86.5% New Zealand owned when it lists, comfortably meeting the government's target of 85% local ownership. And finally, the 250,000 figure the member quotes was not a forecast. It was Treasury's thought they might have to cater for up to that for planning purposes.
A supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will he now accept that his asset sales program has failed to achieve his goal of widespread public ownership when only 1% of New Zealanders bought into Meridian and the other 99% of New Zealanders didn't, because they're finding it hard enough to pay the power bill, let alone buy a power company?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, no. And I do find it rather unsavoury when a politician who's been doing his best to sabotage a float comes down here and complains about the number of shareholders that participate in a float. He should look at himself.
Order. That answer now is long enough.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will he now accept that his asset sales program has failed to achieve his goal of keeping costs under $120 million for all of the privatisations, when in fact the cost to the taxpayer for just the first 2 privatisations is now well over $250 million?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I doubt the veracity of the member's comment, but can I tell him this? This government and New Zealand taxpayers have benefited from these floats so far to $3.6 billion. And if the member thinks it's that bad, why doesn't he just go out there and promise to buy them back and borrow the money offshore, or just print the money?
Supplementary.
Order.
What a failure.
Order. Supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will he now accept that his asset sales program has failed to achieve his goal of raising $5 to $7 billion, given that it is now very clear that they won't even get near the bottom of the $5 to $7 billion band?
Honourable Stephen
Mr.
Joyce.
Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, no. And here we have a member once again, for his own political gain, trying to cost New Zealand taxpayers money by talking down the value of these assets, as he has done the whole way through. And again, there's something unsavoury when a government is elected on a policy program and an individual sets out to economically sabotage it.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will he now accept that his asset sales program has failed to convince New Zealanders that privatisation is a good idea, given that the vast majority, 99%, did not buy shares in Meridian? New Zealanders have consistently opposed the sales in every published opinion poll, and New Zealanders signed the petition for a referendum on asset sales in record numbers.
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, no. And that's because the New Zealand public is cleverer than Mr. Norman. because they understand the government makes choices and has to make choices on their behalf. They don't want to borrow money. They don't want mad printing money. They want to know that the government is running the economy well. And the sad thing that sticks in that member's craw is that this government was elected on this policy at the last election.
Supplementary.
Order. Order. Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Who chose to go ahead with the decision to sell the shares in Meridian in spite of all the problems of going ahead? Was it the Minister of Finance or was it the Green Party? Who is responsible for the decision to go ahead with the sale?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the government makes its decisions. It's quite patently obvious the Green Party is not responsible, full stop.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Given that it was the government's decision to go ahead with the sale in very unfavourable circumstances with very poor outcomes, will the Minister of Finance take responsibility for the abysmal outcome where only 62,000 people bought into the company, or about 1% of New Zealanders?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Dear, oh dear. On behalf of the Minister of Finance, Mr. Speaker, no. The reality is simply this. It is the most successful retail IPO by value in New Zealand's history. We have 62,000 retail shareholders, and if the member wants to look for anybody who wants to know why there wasn't more shareholders, he needs to look in the mirror at his crazy 70s-style socialist, communist, central power policy.
Supplementary.
Order. Order. Go.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question. Order. Order. I'm calling a supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does he really think it's credible to blame everyone else for the failure of his asset sale program rather than taking responsibility for it himself? I thought individual responsibility was one of the premises of the National Party. And does he really want to blame it on the Green and Labor parties for presenting a popular and credible plan that would reduce power prices, given that only 1,700 potential investors pulled out of Mighty River after New Zealand Power was announced anyway?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, it's quite patently obvious that the Greens believe in fairy tales. Their politics and around economics is absolutely hopeless. This float has been successful. The government has raised $3.6 billion. And if the member is not just politicking like his friend on the convention centre, he should pop out and say that he'd buy it back.
Order. Question number 2, Honourable Clayton Cosgrave.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Finance and asks,